Sup gamers, CTA here. Insomniac Games. Most people in today's day and age probably think of the recent Spider-Man PS4 when they hear that name. But let's talk about what is probably inarguably Insomniac's most popular hit, the PlayStation classics themselves. I'm of course talking about Spyro the Dragon. Created in 1998, Spyro the Dragon became a huge hit. The first game alone selling like 7 million units. It spawned a series so iconic that I guarantee you when someone mentions the word PS1, one of the first two franchises that comes to mind are probably Crash and Spyro. But with the end of the PS1 and Universal holding the rights to Spyro, Insomniac ditches the series for a new IP on the upcoming PlayStation 2, and thus Ratchet and Clank was born in 2002. To say it started a successful series is a bit of an understatement, because, and I'm not joking, it created a 13-game series, which compared to its PS2 brothers Sly Cooper and Jak and Daxter, it far outlasted them, with Sly only having 4 games and Jak having 6. But yet, despite the clear success, not many people talk about the series for some reason. The Ratchet and Clank series means so much to me. It's my childhood. It's one of my favorite series ever, and many games are within my favorite games of all time list. Thus, welcome to the Ratchet and Clank Marathon. Sorta. I won't be reviewing every game in the series, just 8 of them. The main series games and 1 spin-off. I haven't actually played Size Matters or Secret Agent Clank to be honest, and I don't have it in me to talk about the other games like All for One, Full Frontal Assault. So, let's start the marathon of the good Ratchet and Clank games with the first game, Ratchet and Clank. The game begins in the Solana Galaxy in a robot factory where a robot defect named Clank learns valuable information of the galaxy's danger and flees. He's hunted down and crash lands on a backwater planet called Veldin, where our resident main character resides, Ratchet. After rescuing Clank from the crash,
Interesting.
Clank informs Ratchet of the danger that a villain named Chairman Drex threatens the galaxy, and that they must inform a superhero named Captain Quark. Ratchet agrees to accompany Clank to find Quark and kinda stop Drek in the meanwhile. Thus, the adventure begins with setbacks and twists along the way. It's a simple premise, but what do you expect? It's a 2002 platformer. However, the way the game handles its story is pretty unique. It doesn't go for a huge focus on the story itself, but rather its characters, goofy side characters, and unique style of humor.
Haven't we done enough already?
What? I can't hear you.
I said, haven't we done?
Sorry, still having trouble. Tell me later.
Later? We might be dead by then.
What?
I really do not know how to describe the game's humor. The game goes for more satirical sense of humor with a slight edge. This isn't your super cartoony, child-friendly Crash Bandicoot or Spyro the Dragon, but it's not like it's your edgy Shadow the Hedgehog or Jak 2. It's kind of in this in-between zone.
Thank you for your cooperation.
Cut.
And if you don't like it, you can take your whiny, sniveling, snot-nosed populations, form a line behind me, and kiss my... We're still on? Well, turn it off, you idiot!
The original trilogy loves trying to push the limits of what the censors will allow, getting away with what innuendos and inappropriate jokes they can sneak past.
Allow me to demonstrate. Yeah. Oh, mommy.
Turn it off! Turn it off!
Plus comical violence it can get away with by having most of the violence happen to robots. Although it's not as prevalent in the first game, though there are a few moments. Rather than focus on its story, the game has a high emphasis on quirky side characters that don't serve too real significance and you'll only see once, but you'll probably remember them because of how unique they are. From the nerdy Big Al, to the snobby Helga,
Too bad, life's not fair.
to the skateboarder stereotype Skid McMarks,
In the flesh, little dude.
to the legendary plumber,
And blast it!
Look, plumber's crack.
What did you just say?
I said, look, the plumber's back.
All right, wise guy.
and much more. Most characters will stay in your mind because of how enjoyable they are. Even the forgettable ones can give a chuckle or two. Also, I have no idea where else to bring this up, but why does every single character in the entire series that isn't Ratchet or the female love interest only have 3 fingers? I'm not the only one that noticed that, right? It's every single character and I do not understand why. It's fine for characters like Clank, he's a robot, it looks fine. But it looks so weird for characters like, say, Quark. I just had to mention this somewhere in the marathon because it's bothered me for ages. Just why? Anyway, back to the main characters and story. Cameron Drake is attempting to build his own planet for his people, the Blarg, after their home planet got too polluted to live on, by taking the best parts of other planets and attaching it to his own. How does this make any sense? It doesn't, and the game doesn't even bother to think it does. We don't know how it works, and neither do they, so why question it?
Using highly sophisticated technology, which you couldn't possibly understand, we will be extracting a large portion of your planet and adding it to our new one.
Ratchet and Clank eventually find Captain Quark, the egotistical celebrity superhero, and inform them of the situation with Drek. However, Captain Quark is secretly working with Drek so that he may be the new spokesperson of Drek's new planet. The captain lures Ratchet and Clank into a trap, of which Clank gullibly falls for, which causes a rift in their friendship and gives Ratchet a new hatred for Quark. Okay, I can't go this long without talking more about the main characters. Even though the story is not a focus, Insomniac at least tried to build a story with character arcs, but the end result doesn't work that well. And it's all because of that one moment. After being duped by Quark and Clank is the reason for it, Ratchet becomes a huge, unlikable jerk. He's incredibly hateful and petty towards Clank, and lets his own ego cloud his judgment from the greater good. No matter how much damage Chairman Drek is doing, Ratchet's only concern is getting revenge on Quark, and it makes him very unlikable.
Captain Quark is gonna be sorry he messed with me.
This is not about Captain Quark anymore. There are innocent lives being lost.
Yeah? Well, I'm done with this stupid hero stuff. I got my own agenda now.
I mean, I understand what they were going for. They wanted him to turn on Clank and then grow to learn his lesson later on. But the way they handle it, it just doesn't work. Ratchet is not likable in this game after the second half at all.
Yeah, and maybe the salt water will rust your mouth shut.
And the thing is, he only truly sees the errors of his way when his home planet is at risk, making him an even bigger, selfish idiot. This one moment impacts so much of the story and ruins so much of it, making a good chunk of it unenjoyable because of how unlikable they made Ratchet. You know, the main character.
Is that all you can think about? Drek this and Drek that? I got my own problems.
Say what you want about the reboot and how bland Ratchet is in that game, but at least I don't hate him in that game. When you hate your main character, there is a problem. But for something positive, Ultimate Supreme Executive Cameron Drake is a great villain. He's a corporate villain through and through. He's sinister, cruel.
Just because we don't need any more trees doesn't mean they should have them. Destroy everything.
They did a great job at building his presence, despite the fact that Ratchet and Clank never once meet him until the final boss. Yeah, all moments of him are shown in Blarg PSAs and meanwhile cutscenes of just him talking aboard his ship to his minions. Ratchet never meets him and he never meets Ratchet, yet his presence is ever present. The devastation he's bringing to each planet is enough to know that he means business. And it's totally within his character to just sit back and let others do the dirty work for him while he just lays around in his office. Cameron Drake is not the best villain in the Ratchet and Clank series. He doesn't even come close to Doctor Nefarious, but for real, who does?
Track them down and annihilate them!
But I was genuinely surprised at how good a villain he was. Oh, and Quark is a good, egotistical, anti-hero imbecile, I guess. He's unlikable, but unlike Ratchet, you're supposed to hate him. And hey, the voice acting is pretty good. I mean, just take Ratchet.
Oh, and by the way, you can stop calling me sir. The name's Ratchet.
Wait a minute. That's not James Arnold Taylor! Who is this imposter? Okay, but for real, Ratchet in this game is voiced by Mikey Kelly, and he does a pretty good job. Most of the time.
The people on those planets are hosed.
It fits the character really well, and but he's not perfect. But there is a reason James Arnold Taylor voices Ratchet in every single Ratchet and Clank game afterwards, because he is Ratchet.
It's been pretty busy. After Drek's defeat, there were parades, press conferences, fancy dress balls.
And the wiener roast at Al's.
Oh yeah, that.
So it's jarring to hear revisiting the first one when Ratchet's voiced by someone else. Again, to Mikey's defense, he didn't do a bad job. fits the character pretty well.
Look, the plumber's back.
Very funny.
But the other characters are voiced really well, even the side characters. David Kaye nails Clank perfectly and remains his voice actor for the entire series,
That's right, I am the man.
as well as Jim Ward as Quark, who perfectly captures the egotistical numbskullness of the character.
Back so soon?
Oh, you're talking to me.
I'm not in the habit of talking to myself, you buffoon.
Anyway, after all the issues I just mentioned, it's not as big a deal as I made it out to be, because the story does not take itself seriously. At all. The game is cartoony and goofy, and it knows this, and it doesn't take itself seriously. Case in point, infobots. Infobots are almost like a collectible. They're more or less just a goal to meet to reach the end of the level. Upon finding an infobot, it will play a video that's supposed to progress the story to the next level, but they're hilariously plot convenient. Just by helping people or even buying them, infobots are the most straightforward plot advancing element I've ever seen in a game.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, here, take this.
Want to buy this infobot from me? Shows footage of a planet we want something from, or Drake's doing bad things on. There is no rhyme, reason, or logic to it. It's just, here, go here now. And I love it. It's so nonsensical, and the game just rolls with it. It knows the game makes no sense, it just embraces it. Oftentimes, the infobots are just hanging out by themselves with no one around, just stumbling upon them shows you exactly where you're supposed to go next. The story is not serious. The whole reality Insomniac made for this series is supposed to be cartoony, over the top, yet violent and nonsensical, and it just rolls with it. The actual story of the first game isn't that great in of itself. It had a good simple premise for a platformer, but by trying to add character growth, it kind of backfired a little bit, but it's made up for by its memorable one-time side characters. And hey, the story is miles better than the reboot. Oh yeah, I just realized, I never even explained what kind of game Ratchet and Clank is. Ratchet and Clank is a standard 3D platformer, except you have a large arsenal of over-the-top and destructive weapons. Ratchet starts off with a fairly standard moveset, a double jump, a side flip, and a wall jump, and can attack with his handy oversized wrench. The more you progress through the game, the more abilities you will gain. Kind of like Spyro. Pretty soon, once you get the helipack, Ratchet will be able to high jump, long jump, and most importantly, glide in midair. Long jumps and gliding are the bread and butter of this game. It's always great when a platformer has a hover or glide to help with platforming. And Ratchet just feels really good to control, though he can be a little slow and gliding is a bit stiff. Later in the game you'll get the thruster pack, which changes how you long and high jump. It has one major benefit no other game in the series has. By performing a long jump in midair, you can do a midair dash, and that is something I love about the first game. It's so easy to completely cheese certain moments because of it, and I love it. It's such a shame you can't do it in other games. But the real thing that sets Ratchet and Clank apart from other platformers is its weapons. The Ratchet and Clank series is designed solely for the use of some of the most over-the-top, cartoonishly destructive weapons you will ever see in a platformer. The first game isn't nearly as over-the-top as the other games, but there's still a lot of variety in the weapons. You have your standard weapons like a rapid-fire pistol, a flamethrower, a rocket launcher, a bomb glove, etc. But there's some unique and creative ones, like the glove that drops robot minions who attack enemies for you, a RC rocket launcher you can manually fly into distant targets, a beam ray that turns people into chickens, and probably the most creative, a gun that vacuums up enemies and turns them into ammunition as you shoot them at other enemies. In other games, enemies often have a lot of health because of how many attacks you'll be throwing at them, but in the first game, the gunplay is much calmer. It's very clear in the first game that the Ratchet games were designed by Insomniac. Enemies feel very Spyro-esque, especially in their behavior patterns. Most enemies can be taken out with 1 to 2 hits no matter which weapon you use, and the tougher ones generally taken 3 to 4 hits. Because of this, weapon damage is fairly balanced. Even the wrench is actually useful in this game, so most situations can be handled by the same few weapons. Which brings me to the issue. Weapons kinda suck in this game. Now, the game is built around the weapons pretty well, but there's a few issues. First, the biggest issue is there is no lock strafe. Most of the weapons will auto-target an enemy if you're facing that general direction, but if you want to move or jump out of the way, which is something you have to do when enemies are attacking you, you have to stop shooting to avoid the attack, then face them again. This makes most encounters annoying to tackle. Now, it's not a system you can't get used to, but that doesn't make it less of a chore. Because of it, lots of encounters need to be taken slowly and cautiously, or attack them from a long distance. Another issue is you'll probably only use the same few weapons throughout the entire game because most situations can be handled by the same few weapons. There's only a small handful of good weapons. This is probably the only game the blaster is actually good. In fact, it's probably one of the most useful in the game. It fires really fast, has a long range, can kill most enemies in a couple of hits, and is very useful on bosses. The Pyrometer is good for large groups of enemies that are surrounding you in up-close and panicky situations. The Devastator does a lot of damage, but is horribly inaccurate, and is used more as a sniper weapon than a ballistics option. The Agents of Doom are actually pretty useful, but I didn't really use them much this playthrough. And the Tesla Claw is basically the Pyrometer and the Blaster mixed together, but it's really hard to get. And those are practically the only weapons you will even need to use. Sure, some of the other weapons can have moments where they're useful, but even in those situations, a different weapon will likely do the same job, if not better. The Suck Cannon is decent, but the Pyrometer or Blaster can handle the same job. The Visibomb Gun can take care of great distant targets, but so can the Devastator. Many of the weapons aren't even that good. Weapons don't even upgrade through use in this game, so there's no reason to ever change weapons if one is doing the job. Sure, you can buy gold weapons for a high bolt count, but you won't even be able to afford them because the bolt distribution is garbage. The game's currency is bolts. Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense, don't question it. And they are ridiculously hard to come by. The game is extremely stingy with its bolts, and you will almost never have enough to buy the weapons you want. Even if you scour the whole level and break every crate you find, you will still barely scrape by on the weapons you need. But here's the kicker, the game often forces you to pay your precious bolts to progress the game. So all that effort you put into saving up for that one weapon you wanted now goes into paying to move on to the next level. This system is atrocious, and it even gets brought back in the next game, although it's far less severe. I mean, just look at how ridiculous this is. I start on this one planet with about 20,000 bolts, and then I go through one section of the level and earn about 2,000 bolts. Great, that's a decent amount. But would you look at that? I need to pay to progress the game. And oh, I need to refill an ammo. And oh, would you look at that? I am back at 20,000 bolts, right where I started. Even after I bought all the weapons I needed, I saved all my money so I could finally get the last weapon, the Tesla Claw. So after about the 5th planet, I didn't buy any more weapons. Even after saving my money for a majority of the game, I still couldn't afford the Tesla Claw even after it became available. I couldn't even afford the Visibomb Gun by the end of the game. And I never got every weapon I wanted because the bolt distribution in this game is utter garbage. It's genuinely my biggest problem with the first game. But if you're able to put up with the game and grind through hero mode to get enough bolts, you can buy the most powerful weapon in the game, the Rhino. This baby is guaranteed to rip you a new one. This puppy is a fully automated ballistic rocket launcher that rains death with the press of a button. One shot will shoot several heat-seeking rockets that will likely kill most enemies in the area, and 10 shots can kill the final boss. I barely even used the Rhino in the first game, to be honest, because I would never unlock it. But man, is it awesome. And it started the trend of the greatest weapon series ever known to video games. To be completely honest, I used to have a huge grudge against the weapon system in this game. In fact, I used to dislike it. But as of recent, I've discovered it's not nearly as bad as I used to make it out to be. I can't lie, there's a lot of moments where I get frustrated or annoyed because of how dated the system is in this game, but it's still a decent first attempt. It's just dated, especially when compared to future games. Alongside a plethora of weapons, there's a handful of gadgets you will obtain. There are gadgets such as the aforementioned helipack and thruster pack, and there's other gadgets like the amazing swing shot. There's a reason the thing is a series staple, because it's awesome. Swinging around nodes like Spider-Man never gets old. Plus, the Hydro Pack and Oxygen Mask are incredibly helpful for swimming, but they should have been available much sooner, if not from the start. Look at the other games having from the start. Most games have a lock puzzle, and frankly the first game has one of the best. It's simple. Line up the lasers into the locks without something blocking it. It's simple, and it just works. Granted, most people will probably just spin them around randomly until they get it, but if you take the time to think out your moves, it's pretty well made. Definitely much better than many of the lock puzzles in later games. Unfortunately, most of the other gadgets really aren't that interesting. There's a Hydro Displacer which takes water from one location to another. It's about as interesting as it sounds. But the Hologuise is probably the worst gadget in the entire game. You activate a disguise to fool robot guards into letting you through. Fine in concept, but there's a few issues. You can't jump at all, and you move as slow as a snail. So most of the time it's better to just kill everything when you can rather than sneaking around because it's so slow. Luckily it's only ever used twice, but it's very tedious both those times. The rest of the gadgets aren't really worth talking about. The level design is actually fairly linear, but it doesn't really feel that way. Every level kind of has a Spyro-esque design. Each level branches out into 2 or 3 paths, each with their own reward. In each path, your goal is straightforward and is as simple as reach the end. But because of each level branching and often looping back on itself, it gives the illusion that the worlds aren't that linear. The game is split into several planets, each completely unique to each other. Every planet is designed to feel just like that, a completely different planet. Each with its own culture, style, setting, atmosphere, etc. Though they aren't very alien in the traditional sense or completely drastic with how different they are, the majority of the planets are extremely iconic. And there's 18 planets, so the game is fairly long. Admittedly, I wasn't a big fan of the first game in the past, but I can't deny it nailed its worlds and level design really well. In fact, that's the original game's biggest strength, its platforming and level design. So many of the levels are memorable and iconic and are just fun to explore. Anyone who's played the first game will always remember planets such as Novalis, Iridia, Nebula G34, Blackwater City, Altanis Orbit, Kalibo 3, and of course the most iconic location in the entire series, Metropolis Kurwan, which also has the most iconic song in the game. Yeah, I couldn't think of a clever segue or where to fit this part in. The music! Ratchet games have a certain style to them I can't quite explain. The music is done by David Bergard, and I'm certain I probably just messed up that pronunciation. The music overall won't be as catchy or memorable as some of the other platforming series like say Mario or Sonic, but there's a certain style to the music. Maybe it's just the instruments, but even if you can't remember the tune to a certain song, you could just listen to the music and instantly know it's a Ratchet and Clank song. And hey, I have to give the first game some credit. There's a decent amount of memorable and catchy songs. Many of which I've used throughout the video, but as mentioned before, easily the most iconic song in the entire series is perhaps Metropolis. Just listen to this and try not to tap your feet along to the beat. Overall, I wouldn't call the soundtrack fantastic or anything, but it's still pretty good. I should address the elephant in the room by this point. You may have already noticed I am playing the PS3 remastered port of the game. Why? Well, because it's more convenient for myself and because I'll get a better resolution out of it. But the real reason I'm bringing this up is because of Sony's issue when it comes to PS2 ports. Almost every single PS2 port, at least from my experience, has some to many issues that were not present in the original. Whether it be visual mistakes, aspect ratio problems, and straight up glitches. Ratchet and Clank games are far from safe from this problem. Granted, the first game probably has the least amount of issues of the original 4 games, but it's still not perfect. The vendor guy is ridiculously crunched down. Sometimes a character will appear way bigger than they're supposed to be, and oftentimes character models' eyes will clip through themselves, giving them the appearance of no pupils. Generally, most of the issues are minor at best, just a few visual glitches that newcomers will probably never even notice. But it doesn't change the fact that the PS2 versions of each game are better than the PS3 version. I don't know the full extent of emulating PS2 games, and I won't pretend I do, but there's no way it's impossible to get older games on a more powerful console without additional issues. Square Enix has proof you can take PS2 games and make the remaster superior to the original, so Sony is just lazy in my eyes with these inferior ports. And they should be ashamed that Deadlock got approved on the PlayStation Network store. But we'll get to that another day. Anyway, back to the actual gameplay. What's an early 3D platformer without varying gameplay styles? Ratchet and Clank is no exception to this trend. Let's just get it out of the way. The Clank sections are the worst moments in the entire game. It may only be twice, but they are some of the most boring parts of the game. Clank moves slower than my internet speed and is as stiff as Kingdom Hearts 1, is vertically challenged, and his only method of attack is a short-range, weak punch. Therefore, his main mechanic is taking control of gadget bots to do his work for him. Using the command menu, he can order bots to attack enemies or enter special doors to progress. It's very boring, on top of his ridiculous walk speed. It becomes even more annoying when you have to go all the way back to where he found one of the bots because an enemy destroyed it. You know, which happens a lot. Clank levels in general suck, a Crack in Time aside, because they're fantastic in that game. But I think everyone can collectively agree that they're probably at their worst in the first game. Oh, I lied. You play as Clank 2 more times, but this time Clank is giant. It's a little bit more enjoyable than the regular Clank sections, but still nothing spectacular. Clank moves really slow yet again, but because you're massive, you can punch every structure and crush enemies with your feet, plus shoot missiles out of your wrist and fire giant energy balls. But with a description like that, you'd think it would be awesome, but it's really not. One touch I do love though is that Ratchet jumps on Clank's back like Clank does him, and I just find that detail really charming. One minigame I used to love as a child were the hoverboard races. They're alright now, but they're pretty slow, making them not as enjoyable as I remember. Especially with the first race before you get the Zoomerator. It does get better after that, but they still aren't that great. Because the two tracks themselves aren't anything special, all things considered. And it's really easy to mess up trying to perform a trick. The reboot actually does make them fantastic, but if you want a good hoverboard racing game from that era, just go play the Sonic Riders games. Another small rant I need to get out. Why on earth do developers always try to add turret missions to as many 3D platformers as possible? Why is it always turrets that get chosen when devs are looking for a variety to add? They are never fun. I cannot name a single game where there's ever been a good turret section. Sure, again, it doesn't appear that much in the game, but is there anyone who's ever liked a turret section? I really hate this trend, and I'm absolutely going to bring this up in other games, and if I review Sly or Jack. And there's a few flying missions that control badly, but I think that's enough of that. The bosses in the game are kind of rough. They're honestly nothing special. There's about 4 bosses in the entire game, and that's even including the pathetic Alien Queen mini-boss. The Blargian Snagglebeast is practically the only genuine boss besides the final boss, and he's not even anything that special. The Quark fight is lame because you don't even fight him, it's just a bland spaceship battle. Funnily enough, you can actually skip the fight entirely through a glitch. And I have a big rant against the final boss. Spoiler warning, I will be showing the final boss. Though it's really not that big a deal, if you wish to avoid it, skip to here on the screen. The final boss sucks. So many times I've actually quit on the final boss just because it's so frustratingly tedious and aggravating. There's many issues, but the absolute biggest problem can be summed up into 2 words. Bullet sponge. The boss has way too much health and your weapons barely do any damage, making the fight take forever. And it's not exactly an easy fight either, so you could spend about 10 minutes just to reach the final phase to just die and start all over again. And let's not forget, you need a lot of bolts, like over 18,000, just to cover the ammo refills you will need because there's a strong chance you will die multiple times. It is such a frustrating fight that most of the time I can never even bring myself to actually kill him. This recent time is the first time in a long time I actually persevered long enough to defeat him. I mean, I can at least appreciate he's much more of a final boss and isn't as pathetic as the final boss in the next game. But I can't decide which is worse. So pathetic the fight ends in 30 seconds, or so frustrating that you don't enjoy the fight. I have to be honest, growing up, I was not a fan of the first game. I didn't think it was a bad game, but I personally didn't like it. However, now after revisiting the game after several years, the game is pretty good. I have a newfound respect for it, and it's not nearly as flawed as I remembered. Now, some of my biggest complaints still hold true. The weapons still kinda suck. The weapons and the lack of a lock strafe are still some of my biggest problems with the game. The game is still built mostly around it, and it's not nearly as bad as I remember it, but it can still be a pain at times. Not to mention how ridiculously hard it is to find bolts is still probably my biggest complaint with the game. When it comes to gunplay, Ratchet 1 disappoints. It's pretty dated in that regard. However, as a straight up platformer, yeah, it's a really solid game. The controls are good, the worlds are great and memorable, the worlds and characters are charming, it's just an overall really good platformer. But in all honesty, my favorite thing is just breaking the game using slope intercept jumps. For some reason, when using the helipack, if you do a crouch jump and land on a sloped surface, there's a specific period where Ratchet can enter a crouch animation when you're supposed to slide, meaning you can jump again to scale surfaces you were never intended to climb, skipping the entire level. And the levels often have the end near the beginning, so it feels great just breaking the level design. And these tricks work in practically all the original trilogy, This may be an exploit, but man, it feels great. Anyway, back to my thoughts. Yes, the first one still has a lot of issues, and even though those issues can get very annoying, I still thoroughly enjoyed the game this time around. It felt like I was finally able to give the game a proper shot this time around after years of unfair bias. It's far from my favorite Ratchet game, but I still recommend the game, and in a way, I do recommend it more than the reboot, sort of. The original has more charm and effort, but the reboot has better gameplay, but that's a topic for another day. But for Ratchet and Clank, I give the game a solid 7.5 out of 10. Let me just say, if you made it this far into the video, just thank you for watching. This was my first review ever, and it was just a lot of work. Not to mention I had a lot of complications when it came to my PS3 not wanting to cooperate, so this marathon was on thin ice. I'm trying to do the outro as unscripted as possible, so just bear with me. For real, if you liked the video, please support me if you want to see more of this from the future. Obviously, I'm doing the rest of the Ratchet and Clank games as long as my PS3 continues to work. This channel is going to be very 3D platformer focused. I know I want to cover A Hat in Time eventually, as well as the Sly Cooper and Jak and Daxter games. The next scripted video I'm doing involves Crash Team Racing, but also leave down in the comments a game you would like me to play. This is the point where most YouTubers would add their plugs of their Twitter or whatever, but I don't really have any plugs to add, so just do the stuff that helps me. You know, the ones that YouTube always wants you to do, the like, comment, subscribe, bell, whatever. And again, if you made it this far, I thank you, and I bid you adieu.